All right, everybody, time to make a video starring two brothers. That's right, two brothers, both having red hair. You can make a movie out of these two brothers. In fact, the movie's already been made. It's in post-production, and it's starting filming next fall. We're talking about two brothers, Shanks and Shamrock, both children of nobles, on God Valley, where explosions and giant blasts of hockey are erupting all over the place. And there's also dragons, like actually a guy named Dragon, but there's also a real dragon, and that dragon is going to be flying around, and he's going to be fighting giant spider monsters. But not only that, these two brothers are going to be separated by a giant sexy woman with horns. But not only that, there's another dragon there. Actually, no, there's only just the two dragons, but there's also two brothers, right? And then, just when you think things got knocked into 12th gear, a giant Oranos ancient weapon is going to wake up from under the island with the dragons. And it's up to these two brothers who, by the way, did I mention these brothers are just babies? But they're badass, okay? And they're gonna save the day. Two brothers. Okay, Rick and Morty did that joke infinitely better, so go watch it. But, I mean, yeah. All right, today we're going to be talking about Shanks and Shamrock. They were born. That happened. Okay, they were definitely born. Their dad is Garling Figarland, which, that sucks. You know, you can't control who your parents are going to be. You know what I mean? The mom seemed nice. We don't know her name. What's the name of Shanks and Shamrock's mom? Let's start with that. Let's go with, Gloria. I don't know why that was the first thing that popped into my mind. Gloria was the mother of Shanks and Shamrock. I'm just going to use that name for the rest of this video here. Okay, so Garling arrives on God Valley a little while ago, and he notices something crazy, something absurd, something the Great One would surely be pleased with, right? The Great One, of course, being Emu. So it could be just the Davy clan. It could be something alluding to maybe something sleeping under God Valley that Saturn kind of mentioned in the last chapter. Maybe it was the ancient weapon. Maybe it was like a poneglyph or something. I don't know. But there was something there that he saw that he reported to Emu that we need to make the next hunting competition there. But before he went back and reported all of that, he met a woman on this island, of course, Gloria, and they had a night of passion. And at that point, Shamrock and Shanks were conceived, and then Garling leaves. And the entire time this was going on, by the way, Gloria seemed to imply that, like, oh yeah, no, the dad is off right now, but he's going to come back someday. And then when Garling did come back for the hunting competition, when Shanks and Shamrock were only about a year old, she also seemed like, oh, honey, you're back. Great. We can live together and be a happy family. I knew you'd return. She acted like it was just, like, perfectly normal, like her husband was off on, like, a business trip or something, and he was going to return someday, you know? And unlike Izuku's dad from My Hero Academia, I guess he did. Bad news is he stabs her. So he's like, oh, yes, of course, I have children now. That's crazy. Okay, what are their names? Shanks, Shamrock. All right. Well, I'd love to have the happy family, but not on this island. Also not with you. And then stabs Gloria, and she doesn't die right away, but she does get mortally wounded, and Garling takes the babies and gives them off to his, like, assistant, because Garling, he has a tournament to fight in. He can't, you know, like, change diapers and things. So Gloria manages to wander off to a building where she's bleeding out and dying very soon. Then Dragon shows up at this point, like a Marine, like, recruit, and she's imploring him, please save my children, please. You know, they're twins. They're two brothers. They need to be together. They're two brothers, for God's sake. And Dragon's like, okay, don't worry. I'll make sure they're safe. And Dragon is on a mission, really. Like, his original mission was, you know, to assist in the God Valley games. But really now his mission is like, I need to do something to make up for being part of the God Valley games, right? I need to go and I need to save these two brothers. And I need to make sure they're raised by somebody kind. That was the last wish of Gloria before she left this mortal coil. Please, I hope they are raised by a kind-hearted individual, not the father. Please, not anybody but him. And so Dragon's like, okay. So she dies, she's dead, and so Dragon goes to save Shanks and Shamrock, manages to actually get them away from, like, the center of town pretty easily. However, the Celestial Dragon that was supposed to be watching them sends Maffy after him, and so Maffy manages to take Shamrock and leave. I guess Maffy was unaware that there were two brothers, because she just kind of picks up one of the babies and is just, like, reporting back that, like, yeah, I found the kid, everything's good. So I guess, I don't know, maybe the way that Dragon was holding the kids and then dropped Shanks, and, you know, baby Shanks knocked his head off of a rock and lost consciousness and everything, and so he wasn't crying and making any noise. So I guess that's the reason Maffy only assumed there was one kid. Maffy didn't know that Garling had children, so it was just like, oh, okay, Garling has kids. Like, that was weird. All right, whatever. So she takes Shamrock, at least we can assume it's Shamrock, off to go and, you know, eventually will grow up to be a God's Knight. And we see Shamrock in Elbaf, arriving via the Abyss into the castle with Gunko, all right? And so he has a cool sword, which ate the Mythical Zone model Cerberus, and he also is capable of, like, all the other things that God's Knights are capable of, and is I would assume similar power levels to Shanks. We'll get into that really in a moment. But then we have baby Shanks. What happened to him? Well, after he conked his head, he lost consciousness for a bit. Dragon scooped him up and ran away. Eventually, he would regain consciousness, and it is only at this point that both brothers, I don't know if you know this, but two brothers begin to cry. You know, they didn't cry up until that point. Dragon even made a moment to say that, like, oh, it's weird you two are not crying. Like, all these explosions and craziness is happening around there, and yet no crying. You know, the babies seem perfectly okay. They're just kind of like, you know, they no problem. But the moment they were separated, that's when they started crying. So I'm assuming that's probably the case there. And they will be reunited. They will be reunited later in life. But anyway, Dragon, we still don't know exactly the order of operations on how this goes, but eventually Shanks ends up in a treasure chest, which is then opened by Roger and his crew as they leave God Valley, and they effectively adopt Shanks and raise him as a pirate. And that's where we see Shanks in his formative years, growing up as an apprentice on Roger's crew. Eventually, Buggy also joins. Buggy and Shanks are the same age, although Buggy came a little bit later. And then after the Roger crew breaks up, Roger goes to get executed at Logtown. Shanks and Buggy are present. The only two members of the Roger Pirates that are present at his execution. Maybe makes sense because, you know, obviously Rayleigh and Gabon were very well known at this point, so they couldn't just show up in the crowd. I mean, I guess they could do the same thing Dragon did and have the cloak. You know, it's like it's the trope that anybody that puts on a cloak is all of a sudden super nonchalant. Nobody notices a person wearing a cloak, right? It's just like, oh, that guy wearing a very obvious cloak off to the side. I wonder if he's a mysterious individual. Nah, he's just a dude wearing a cloak. But yeah, Rayleigh, Gabon, Mugren, Spencer, all those guys, they don't visit Roger for his execution. I'm sure they watch it via Den Den Mushi and read about it in the papers, but that's it. Odin was very busy at the time. He was dancing in a flower capital, damn it! Anyway, Shanks and Buggy are there. After that event, Shanks asks Buggy to join his crew. Buggy turns him down because he thought that they were going to go right back to the Grand Line. Shanks is like, not yet. I'm going to go someday, but right now I just need to train, gather more power, get a crew together. Buggy, I would love for you to join me. Buggy's like, screw off, and then he leaves. And so now at this point with Shanks, we don't really know exactly what happens. I made a whole video dedicated to just this moment of Shanks' life. You know, he goes off and finds a crew and then eventually ends up at Marijwa at some point, so I'm not going to go way into it here. But from what we learned later, when we have the flashback, the beginning of this whole flashback, when it was just Loki's flashback, we see Gabon and Shanks chilling out in the hot spring together next to Gabon's sexy giant wife, Ripley. And we see Shanks talking to Gabon about all the crazy stuff that's happened in his life. Up until this point, you know, Shanks is in his 20s and apparently just got back from Marijwa. He has the tattoo of the God's Knights on his arm. This is before he lost the arm. This is before he went to Fuchsia Village and before he met Luffy and all that kind of stuff, right? And so Gabon brings up about how, like, he was the chosen child and all this stuff. And dude, I love this trope. The trope of there's a main character that already had their adventure, but they're still in the story. They're still very relevant, but they could have easily have been the protagonist of their whole manga. The same thing with like Yami in Black Clover. Yami is my favorite character in Black Clover for that reason. You get the impression that like, yeah, he was an isekai protagonist back in his childhood, and grew up and met Julius and everybody and joined the Gray Deer and had all these crazy adventures and learned his dark magic and the way of the sword and all that. But that's not the focus of the manga. The focus of the manga is about Asta, right? And and everybody, right? But Yami is still there, still a prominent character, and still surpasses his limits and gets stronger and still levels up and everything like that, right? But you could write a whole light novel about that guy, right? And the same thing with Shanks, right? You could write a whole light novel about Shanks. Like, really, honestly, if you just back up a little bit, what sounds like the more interesting premise for a pirate-themed fantasy manga, right? The story about a kid who was born into a noble family, but then by complete happenchance ended up on the Pirate King's ship, grew up, got trained by Goldie Roger himself and Silvers Rayleigh and Scopper Gabon, and had a best friend named Buggy, and went on these crazy, like a world-leveling adventures, right? All over the Grand Line, all over the New World. Stuff's blowing up all over the place. He's learning the way of the sword. Roger probably gave him the sword lessons, and probably Rayleigh as well. And then he's training and he's getting stronger, and he's going on all these adventures. And then I don't know, halfway through the manga, Roger dies, and then the second half, and then a time skip happens, I guess, and then Shanks decides to go off and figure out who he is really, right? And he goes back to Marijois and he reconnects with his family, and he lives there for a time, but then remembers that this isn't really who I am, and then he leaves very triumphantly, and he goes and forms his own pirate crew. That sounds interesting. Or the story about some random kid living out in the country that eats a magic devil fruit. Okay, I know. It's like, man, there's a little bit more to Luffy's character than that. It's like, I get it. But I would read both of those stories. That's the point, right? Okay. So, this is more of a video, more of the focus topic here on what happened with Shamrock and the way that Oda is going to take that character, okay? So we got a few, dozen chapters ago, it was after Egghead, we got that chapter that concluded with the 12 characters that are apparently the main contenders to find the One Piece, right? And I don't remember all of them off the top of my head. I don't know, actually, let's try. We have Luffy, Blackbeard, Buggy, and Shanks, the 4 Yonko. They were on the list, obviously. And then we also have Aokiji, I remember being there. Kobe, that was 6. Garling was 7. Shamrock was there as 8, but he was shrouded in shadow. Sabo was there as 9. Emu was there as 10. I'm actually remembering these. Was Akainu on the list? I feel like he would have been because he's the fleet admiral. I might be misremembering. This is where it's starting to fall apart. I'll go with Akainu as 11. And who was 12? The 12th character. I forget the 12th character, okay? But I did better than I originally thought I would. But anyway, yeah, we have all those characters on that list of who's gonna find the One Piece, right? And so that's where Shamrock is introduced. So he's in the running for this, right? It's not like all those characters are going to die except for one. Luffy's going to be the one to find the One Piece, so I guess that proves all those other people are going to die. Kobe specifically said that, hey, Luffy-san, I you're my friend and everything, but I can't allow you to find the One Piece. It's too dangerous for you to find. I need to make sure that doesn't happen. Obviously, it's not going to be a situation where Kobe dies in Luffy's arms in a mighty battle or something like that. I'm sure Kobe will survive by the end of the story. But some of those characters definitely are going to die, and it got me thinking okay, let's say we have Shamrock versus Shanks. I'm assuming those two have fought before, right? I'm assuming when, at the very least, when Shanks returned to Marijois, they at least sparred together for a little while, and perhaps, maybe Shanks even learned some God Knight techniques, from his father and from his brother Shamrock, right? Maybe he learned some moves from them, or learned how to use hockey a certain way. Maybe he even learned the immortality technique or something. Now, I'm assuming that's the power that was given by Emu, and maybe the conduit in order order to channel that power was the tattoo that Shanks had on his arm, which was then subsequently eaten by Lord of the Coast. So, Shanks can't turn, he can't regenerate body parts anymore. I mean, the fact that he is missing an arm is kind of proof of that. Although, that would be a plot twist, wouldn't it? The fact that Shanks was given the ability to reconstitute limbs, but he could switch it on and off. He could toggle the immortality. He could toggle the regeneration. And at some point, Shanks is fighting against Blackbeard, and he's like, okay, I didn't want to have to use this because it's the power of my family, but whatever. He toggles it on, and he regenerates his arm! That would be wild. That would be something you wouldn't expect, all right? But I'm assuming Shanks doesn't have that power. If he did have the power at one point, he forgo it, he surrendered it, he doesn't have it anymore, right? So I think it would be very, very easy. I mean, it's already kind of been shown so far that, like, okay, Shanks is the good twin and Shamrock is the evil twin, and obviously this is going to culminate into a mighty battle between both of them. And it's going to be tough, and it's going to be hard fought. But obviously, good is going to triumph over evil. And Shanks is going to be at a moment, I don't know, I'm picturing this fight over a volcano for some reason. I'm picturing, like, Revenge of the Sith type end of the thing. It was like, I have the high ground, something like that. I don't know. And Shanks has Griffin right at Shamrock's throat. And he's like, brother! Why are you making me do this? We were supposed to be two brothers, not just one. Ah! I'm picturing something like that. And, maybe some line by Shanks at the end of it where it's like, I was raised by a real great man, Goldie Roger. I had a real family. You were raised by Garling, horrible, evil people. You didn't have a real childhood. It was through the compassion that my family gave to me that I will triumph, brother. Something like that. This would be an interesting twist, not to just make it so, like, black and white, good versus evil, in a very, just, like, I don't know, simplistic way, Like, we could do something better than some boring pablum of, like, I am the good brother, I am the evil brother, it's like, aha, I stab you, good triumphs over evil, I have been defeated, we could do something better than that shit, okay, all right. We don't know if Shamrock had a shitty childhood. We know he's a celestial dragon, and Garling is a celestial dragon, and they're shitty people, but Shamrock could have had a perfectly happy childhood. I mean, aside from the whole God Valley incident where, his mother got stabbed, but he might not remember that, and, he was separated from his brother, but he might not remember that, and all the explosions and everything like that. But after he was returned to Marijois, we assume Garling would be a crappy dad. I'm assuming he didn't, like I said, change diapers or actually be there for Shamrock when he was a baby. There was, like, maids and servants and stuff that did that. But when Shamrock grew up and he was getting to the point where it's like, okay, time to learn the way of the sword, time to train in the art of being a God's Knight, right? Garling might have been, like, a good dad in those respects. Shamrock might have been trained in that art and might have been like, okay, dad, and then he was, like, learning how to use the sword and everything, and Garling might have been there for him, and there could have been this whole, like, if that actually does happen, when Shanks and Shamrock do clash and they meet each other again, this could be a thing where it's like, oh, my family actually loved me, and then Shamrock could be like, yeah, mine did too. It's like, our father killed our mother. Let's say that Shanks found out about that somehow. I don't know. Maybe he met Dragon at some point and he told him. I don't know. Because I don't think Dragon left a note explaining the whole situation regarding Shanks in the treasure chest. Of just, like, really quick, Dragon, like, puts baby Shanks in the treasure chest and is like, all right, dear whom this may concern. Oh, wait, is it who this may concern or whom it may concern? I don't have time. This baby is one of a pair of two brothers. The father was a celestial dragon that stabbed the mother. I don't remember her name. I think it was Gloria. Anyway, here you go. Yeah, I don't think Dragon really explained that. So maybe later in life Shanks learned about this. Maybe he still doesn't, right? But let's say he does. Let's say Shanks knows Garling killed his mother and Shamrock's mother. And he's trying to use that as a method to convince Shamrock to, like, come over to the good side or whatever, or don't be a celestial dragon, come on. And then what if Shamrock's just like, oh, well, I wasn't there for that. I don't remember that. So whatever. It's possible Garling could have met somebody else at some point. Obviously, he was in the tournament to go after Shockey. That clearly didn't happen. But there might have been, like Shamrock might have been growing up with a mother. He might have had a mom. Garling might have married somebody else. And it's totally possible he might have had like a relatively okay childhood. Now, overall, it was messed up because he was raised in, Marijois, and he was raised to be this like horrible person that owns slaves and shit. But it's like, I don't really have any bad memories about that, right? And Garling might have actually cared for him. So the whole thing with she's like, oh, I was born and raised in a horrible environment where no one cared about me, and Shanks did have people that cared about him. That's the reason I lost, because there was this void in my heart the entire time. We don't have to do that. It's like there could be a thing where, and this has probably been to something they've discussed already, because once again, remember, we haven't seen the scene yet. Shanks and Shamrock, though, lived together for a while at Marijois. It wasn't just like a couple of days that Shanks spent there. No, apparently it was a significant amount of time. It was a moment where maybe it was Cypher Pool Zero, or maybe it was a God's Knight themselves, eventually tracked Shanks down, knew who he was, found out the information that, wait a minute, you are Shanks Figarland. You are the son of Garling Figarland, the champion of the God Valley tournament, and one of the higher-ranking members of the God's Knights, and you should come back to Marijois with us. And Shanks went. Now, he could have also been forced. Shanks is really strong, although he wasn't as strong back then, I would assume. And maybe the God's Knights gave him a choice. I would like it more if the God's Knights gave him a choice. If they're just like, hey, you can either stay the life of a pirate, or you can come back to where you belong, Shanks, to where your family is. And Shanks might have been going through a moment in his life. This might have been his late teen years or something, where Roger was the only family, and then the Roger Pirates were the only family he's ever known. And so he's like, okay, well, maybe my real family will maybe give me, maybe he felt that. Maybe he felt like the void inside of him, that there was something, like a missing piece of the puzzle or something like that, right? That there's he never felt quite right, or never felt maybe he belonged as a pirate or belonged with the Roger crew. So he's like, all right, I'll go back. And then he meets Shamrock, and him and Shamrock might have had whole bunch of discussions about this and the nature of the world and the way it really works. Now, obviously, Shamrocks would all be bent and twisted and all about how the Celestial Dragons should just rule over everybody. I mean, obviously, Shanks, you should be lucky. You were born into this royal household. Not only were you born a Celestial Dragon, you were born into the Figarland family. This is one of the best families in all of Marijois that you were born into. You have a birthright. And maybe we know that Roger and the rest of the crew, aside from Buggy and Shanks, because they went to Laughtail, Buggy and Shanks stayed behind, Roger's crew learned about the flood, and they chose not to tell anybody about that. And that was a whole point of Vegapunk's message. Even Rayleigh was getting drunk at the bar of just Vegapunk telling everybody the story. You know what I mean? But what if Shanks didn't know about the flood from Roger? What if Shamrock told him later? What if not all the Celestial Dragons know about it? We know that Charlos and his sister and everybody didn't know about the flood. They were like, what? This is weird. But Gunko knew about it, right? So it's possible that the God's Knights knew and none of the other Celestial Dragons knew. So Shamrock could have told him, hey, Shanks, you're really lucky. You're really fortunate that you were born into this family, because you get to be saved. You get to stay up here in the Red Line at Marijois on top of the world as part of the upper class, as part of the God class. And everyone down below is going to die in a horrible flood. In fact, I can even picture Shamrock saying it in a very blasé sort of who cares kind of way of just oh, you had people down below in the lower realm that you cared about? Oh, don't worry. They're all going to die someday. They're all going to get wiped out in a great flood, and you get to survive, and we get to survive, and we're the only ones. You should be really lucky. You should be fortunate. And then Shanks is like, what? Oh, what if that was the thing that actually made Shanks leave Marijois and go back down to be a pirate? That'd be the crazy thing. If it's he goes back to Marijois, is I guess this is where I belong? This is my family? These are the people that I should be with? And maybe for a moment, maybe Shanks was kind of all right, giant golden gilded mansions and nice fluffy beds. We didn't have anything like this, when I was a pirate. and he's training and stuff, and the food was delicious, so kind of like enticing Shanks at first, like maybe this isn't so bad. Then he probably ended up seeing all the slaves and stuff, and maybe Shanks was like, oh, okay, that's a problem. And then Shamrock telling him, like, oh, by the way, the world's going to flood and everybody you ever cared about's going to die. And then Shanks is like, I choose to live in the lower realm. And then he left and forego those powers. And he's like, well, if the world's going to flood and everyone's going to die, I might as well spend the remaining years with the people that I care about, right? And he went back, and then it seems like he started to form the crew before he went to Marijois, but maybe he didn't. I'm not sure, like meeting Yasop and everybody like that. Which would also mean if Shanks knows about the flood because of Shamrock and the Gods Knights telling him, and the Roger crew knew, Buggy was the only person on the Roger crew that didn't find out. I guess until Vegapunk did his message. But aside from that, the only person for years that did not know was Buggy. That's unfortunate. That's unfortunate for sure. But anyway, so yeah, Shanks decides to leave, and then Shamrock is like, fine. And when Shamrock was talking about this with Loki, when Loki was talking about it, is like, hey, wait a minute, you look familiar. I'm wearing a blindfold over my eyes, but you look familiar. And Shamrock is like, yeah, you're talking about my brother Shanks. We were separated at birth. He went back and lived at Marijois for a time, but then he opted to choose to stay amongst the pirates. How would you describe Shamrock's emotional state at that time when he was describing this to Loki? He didn't seem angry. He didn't say, like, oh, yeah, that's my younger brother. Piece of shit. Didn't even want to stay in Marijois like the rest of us. He didn't seem angry. He seemed somewhat indifferent about it. And also, it's a manga panel, so when we get the anime scene, we'll maybe get that information, that emotion conveyed a little bit more clearly than just, text on a piece of paper. But the way that Oda drew him in that scene and the way that Shamrock talked about it was just like, yeah, that's my brother. It could have bordered on indifference, if not maybe a little bit of disappointment, like a little bit of like, yeah, that's my brother. He went back and we hung out for a little while, but then he decided to leave again. Honestly, if he seemed a little sad about it, that does make sense given the fact that the brothers cried when they were separated. So maybe ultimately Shamrock's trying to find that little puzzle piece that, completes him as well, and he didn't know what that was for years. But then he met his brother, and he's like, oh, I have a twin this whole time. That's the part that was missing, right? Okay, and then he leaves. And then Shamrock is like, aw. He didn't want to live in the giant shiny, he didn't want to live in the shiny city. What if Shanks even asked Shamrock to come with him? And be like, hey, you've lived your whole life up here in this shiny gilded city. I lived my whole life as a pirate. I tried living your life, Shamrock, and it just doesn't work for me. Come and maybe try to live my life as a pirate on the high seas. Maybe you'll enjoy it. And maybe Shamrock did have a choice, and he chose not to. He's like, I'm not going to go down and live as a pirate. What are you, insane? Maybe it wasn't even that. Maybe Shamrock considered it, just like how Shanks considered going back to Marijois, and provided that he wasn't forced, he did choose to go do that. Maybe Shamrock did think about it. He was like, life as a pirate, huh? This would add so much more introspection and so much more like interesting dynamics between this. Other than just like, hey, Shamrock, come be a pirate with me. Ah, a pirate? I am a celestial dragon, Shanks. Ah, you go be a dirty pirate if you want. I will stay here and eat my filet mignon. Yeah, you could do that if you wanted, but it would add much more of an interesting dynamic if it's like living the pirate life, huh? Maybe Shamrock did. Maybe Shamrock went to go try to live the pirate life, and he's like, this doesn't work. And then he went back to Marijois. I don't know. This is interesting. There's some stuff we could do with this. Okay. Anyway, but that's the story we're going to have to wait to see next year in 2030. The new saga of One Piece. The new movie coming out with a new trilogy. Two Brothers. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. This will be Teching 101 signing out.